Welcome to the Explainer. So today, in this True Crime Explainer, we are covering mysteries with some absolutely shocking, unexpected twists that you never saw coming. Seriously, these mysterious cases go through twists and turns that are so unbelievable, it is honestly hard to believe the stories are true, but they're entirely real. From cold cases to completely unsolved murders, none of these cases have ever been fully solved, despite massive investigations by detectives. If they were, well, we can only imagine how much more convoluted these stories could become. Will the cases of Sharon Marshall, Gregory Villman, or Nicholas Barclay ever be solved? Or will they forever remain unsolved mysteries? So grab a seat and join us for a true crime storytime covering 3 mysteries with shocking, unexpected twists.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. When we think of a typical mystery, we usually expect a pretty linear path, right? A crime happens, clues are gathered, maybe a perpetrator is caught. But the cases we're looking at today, they operate a lot more like a Russian nesting doll. You open up what you think is the central mystery, only to find this whole other, much darker secret hiding inside, and then another, and another. In these specific cases we're covering, the initial mystery is really just the outermost layer of something far darker.
Section 1. The Girl with No Name. So let's rewind back to the mid-1980s. We have this young woman named Sharon Marshall. She was this bright, popular high school student with an ROTC scholarship, and she literally dreamed of working at NASA. But after an unexpected pregnancy kind of derailed those plans, she ended up giving the baby up for adoption and moved down to Tampa, Florida for a fresh start. But here's the thing, she didn't go alone. She moved in with a much older man named Franklin Delano Floyd. Now, the exact nature of their relationship was, well, incredibly murky. They lived together, sure, but Sharon actually had a second child, little Michael, with another man. And then later, she and Frank eventually got married, often using all sorts of weird aliases. Frank almost never worked. He claimed he had a bad back, so Sharon had to support the both of them by working as an exotic dancer. Well, as she was secretly making plans to finally pack up and leave Frank, tragedy struck. She was found unconscious by the side of a highway in what looked like a hit-and-run accident. Frank claimed he was just asleep at home. 5 days later, Sharon tragically died. But the doctor who examined her noted some old bruises and a highly suspicious head injury, ultimately classifying her death as a homicide.
And that's exactly when Frank's massive web of lies really started to unravel. So he tried to claim an $80,000 life insurance policy that he'd just recently taken out on her. But because he was constantly using all these different aliases, the social security numbers didn't match up. When authorities finally forced him to use his real name, Frank Delano Floyd, they uncovered a completely terrifying criminal history. I mean, his exposed past was horrifying. He'd been convicted of abducting a 4-year-old child back in 1962. He'd escaped a mental hospital, committed bank robbery, had another abduction attempt in 1972. This guy was a hardened fugitive. He had literally been skipping bail and living under fake names for decades, right up until this life insurance claim finally exposed him.
So Frank gets sent back to prison, and Sharon's young son Michael is placed in foster care. By the way, a DNA test proved Frank wasn't even Michael's biological father. But then, in 1994, right after Frank was released, he did the unthinkable. He walked straight into Michael's elementary school, held the principal at gunpoint, literally tied him to a tree, and kidnapped little Michael. About 2 months later, authorities arrested Frank in Kentucky, but Michael was completely gone. And if that isn't horrifying enough, listen to this. A mechanic later bought a stolen abandoned truck at an auction, a truck that Frank had been using. Inside, they found an envelope of photos showing a bound and beaten woman, and those photos perfectly matched the skeletal remains of Cheryl Comesso, who was a former friend and coworker of Sharon's who had mysteriously vanished years prior. But wait, because while they were searching that stolen truck, authorities made an even more sickening discovery. They found older photos of Frank committing horrific acts of abuse against a young girl. For decades, nobody knew who this little girl was. That is, until 2014, when an absolutely jaw-dropping twist was revealed. You guys, Sharon Marshall wasn't just some random girl Frank met. She was actually Suzanne Marie Savarkis. She was the daughter of Frank's former wife. This absolute monster had kidnapped Suzanne as a young child, raised her under multiple aliases, subjected her to unthinkable abuse, moved her all across the country, forced her to marry him when she got older, and then kidnapped her child after she died. It's a reality so depraved that even seasoned investigators initially found it hard to fathom. So, what really happened to Sharon and Michael? Well, Frank Floyd is currently sitting on death row for Cheryl Comesso's murder. After 20 long years, he finally admitted that he shot little Michael while they were on the run and hid the body. But heartbreakingly, the boy's remains have never been found. And as for Sharon, Frank absolutely refuses to speak about her death to this very day. We finally know who she really was, but the exact truth of her final moments, that is a secret Frank is taking to the grave.
Section 2. The Crow's Deadly Revenge.
All right, let's shift gears and head over to Eastern France in the 1980s. The Villemain family, Jean-Marie, Christine, and their bright little baby boy Gregory were, by all accounts, a happy and successful family. That is, until they suddenly became the target of a mysterious anonymous tormentor that the French press dubbed Le Corbeau, or the Crow. On October 16, 1984, the absolute worst happened. 4-year-old Gregory vanished from his own front garden. Shortly after, Gregory's uncle received a phone call with these chilling exact words. "I've kidnapped the boy, I've strangled him, and I've thrown him in the river Valone. I have my revenge." The very next day, a letter arrived echoing that exact same cruel sentiment. And tragically, the little boy's bound body was found drowned in the river, exactly as the Crow had promised.
What followed was just this tragic domino effect of paranoia that completely tore the Villemain family apart. In 1985, Jean-Marie's cousin, Bernard, was arrested based on some handwriting analysis and a teenage relative's statement. But when Bernard was cleared and released, a grieving Jean-Marie actually took the law into his own hands and shot and killed his cousin. Then, unbelievably, handwriting experts pointed the finger at Gregory's own mother, Christine. She was charged, went on a hunger strike, miscarried twins, and was eventually totally cleared. The whole thing was such a mess that decades later, the lead magistrate on the case even took his own life due to the crushing pressure of this unsolved tragedy.
Over the decades, they tried DNA testing on the letters, the rope, the stamps, but it all came back inconclusive. However, police recently reopened the case using a brand new technology called stylometrics. Now, this isn't just basic handwriting analysis. Stylometrics is the linguistic analysis of style, syntax, punctuation, and specific turns of phrase to identify an anonymous author. Basically, investigators are scanning all those old threatening letters with this modern tech to try and uncover the anonymous author's unique verbal fingerprint.
But the lingering question remains, who is the Crow? Because even with this new stylometric technology, exhumations, and nearly 40 years of agonizing investigation, the true identity of the Crow remains completely unconfirmed. The motive for Gregory's murder, whether it was some sort of dark family jealousy or a workplace grudge, remains a total mystery.
Section 3. The Chameleon in the House.
Okay, let's look at the bizarre case of Nicholas Barclay. In 1994, this 13-year-old boy vanished from San Antonio, Texas. He was known as a troubled teen, so police initially just assumed he was a runaway. 3 whole years go by with no sign of him until his family gets a miraculous phone call. Nicholas had been found alive in Spain, allegedly having escaped an international child trafficking ring. But the sheer absurdity of what happens next is almost hard to overstate. When Nicholas's sister Carrie flew to Spain to get him, the person she met looked absolutely nothing like her brother. Like, the real Nicholas was blonde-haired and blue-eyed. This person claiming to be him? He was 23 years old, had dark hair, brown eyes, and spoke with a heavy French accent. Yet, Carrie looked right at him and claimed she knew for sure it was her brother. So how on earth do you explain a completely different eye color and a foreign accent? Well, this imposter had a pretty wild alibi. He claimed that the child traffickers who took him had chemically altered his hair and eye color through these bizarre experiments to hide his identity. He also claimed he was forced to speak only French for 3 years, and the family brought him back to Texas and seemingly just accepted this. It actually took a highly suspicious private investigator who noticed that the imposter's ear shapes didn't match old photos of Nicholas, and the FBI finally stepping in to run fingerprints and DNA to completely expose the lie. It turned out the man living in their house was actually a 23-year-old French con artist named Frédéric Pierre Bourdin. International authorities knew him as the Chameleon. This guy was a professional imposter who had assumed a staggering 500 different stolen identities across Europe. 500! He finally pleaded guilty to passport fraud and perjury, ultimately going to prison for 6 years.
But uncovering Bourdin's true identity was just the first layer of this particular doll. The real question that haunted investigators, and honestly even haunted Bourdin himself, was why did the Barclays accept an imposter who looked and sounded absolutely nothing like their son? Well, Bourdin introduced the darkest twist yet. He claimed he couldn't believe they accepted him so easily either. He stated that the family, especially the sister Carrie, knowingly fed him information. Like they would point out relatives in photos so he could easily pass the police tests.
And that massive claim led investigators to look really closely at the highly suspicious behavior of the Barkley family. For instance, Nicholas's older brother, Jason, had reported a phantom break-in about 3 months after Nicholas vanished. That's a tactic police say murderers sometimes use to make it seem like a victim is still alive and out there. Plus, the family actively pressured investigators to just close the case once the imposter arrived, totally ignoring the glaring physical differences. The private investigator strongly suspected the family, or Jason specifically, actually murdered Nicholas and just used this imposter to cover it up. But before Jason could be formally investigated, he tragically died of a drug overdose, leaving the trail entirely cold.
Section 4. Forever Unsolved Mysteries?
So, we've peeled back layer after layer of these incredibly tangled cases today, exposing stolen identities, international cons, and decades-old secrets finally brought into the light. Yet, despite solving part of the puzzle in each of these, the most important questions remain completely unanswered. For Sharon Marshall, sure, we now know her real name, but Frank Floyd refuses to reveal her exact cause of death, and little Michael's location remains undiscovered. In the case of Gregory Villemin, even with modern stylometrics, the true identity and motive of the Crow is still unconfirmed. And for Nicholas Barkley, we know who the imposter was, but the actual fate and location of the real 13-year-old Nicholas is just this chilling blank page.
Which leaves us with this lingering thought. Will the tangled truth of these cases ever be fully untangled? We seem to have all the pieces, but the final picture just absolutely refuses to come into focus. It makes you wonder, how many other incredible secrets are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the right clue to unravel them? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning everything, and I'll see you next time.